여러분 안녕하세요. 제1회 전국 정신장애인 당사자 대회 첫날 사회를 맡은 한양대학교 재철원 교수입니다. 저는 지금 당사자 운동 단체들이 1회 당사자 대회의 주제로 새로운 대안이라고 하는 주제를 설정한 것에 대해서 전폭적으로 공감을 해서 여기에 앉아 있습니다. 새로운 대안이라고 하는 것은 우리 정신장애인들에게 복지 서비스를 늘려라, 인권 친화적인 치료를 해라, 비자의 입원을 줄여라 라고 하는 것이 아닙니다. 현재의 정신건강 시스템을 혁명하자, 전폭적으로 바꾸자, 그리고 현재의 정신건강 시스템을 혁명할 수 있는 당사자들의 꿈과 비전과 희망을 논의하자라고 하는 것이라고 생각이 듭니다. 정신건강에 문제가 있는 사람들에 대해서 우리는 그동안 정신질환이라고 하는 딱지를 붙이고 그리고 약물을 복용해서 치료를 해야 된다. 치료가 되어야 학업을 계속할 수 있고 직장을 다니고 그리고 결혼을 하고 일상생활을 할 수 있다라고 끊임없이 이야기해왔습니다. 병원에서 그렇게 이야기를 하고 있고 재활시설에서 그렇게 이야기하고 있고 사회복지기관에서 그렇게 이야기해왔습니다. 이 문제는 정신건강의 문제를 개인의 문제라고 이야기하는 것입니다. 너가 고쳐야 된다. 너가 바뀌어야 된다. 라고 하는 것입니다. 그러나 정신건강에 문제가 있는 대부분의 사람들은 어린 시절 아동학대를 당했거나 또 부모로부터 버림받아서 아동복지시설에 있었거나 학교에서 왕따를 당했거나 혹은 성인이 되어서 직업을 구하지 못했거나 실업이 되었거나 등등 개인적으로나 사회적으로 그리고 가정에서 그리고 집단에서 거부당하고 소외되고 버림받았던 그런 경험들이 있습니다. 이런 경험들을 우리는 트라우마라고 이야기를 하죠. 이 트라우마는 사회 현상, 또 사회 구조의 문제와 분리될 수가 없습니다. 정신적인 건강에서 어려움을 겪는 것은 한편 사회 문제와 밀접한 연관이 있음에도 불구하고 그런 사회 구조를 바꾸려고 하는 노력 대신에 개인에게 딱지를 붙여서 너가 바뀌어야 된다라고 하는 메시지를 주는 것입니다. 굉장히 강력한 이데올로기입니다. 이 이데올로기를 깨부수지 않고서는 한 걸음도 앞으로 나갈 수 없을 것이라고 생각이 듭니다. 1회 당사자 대회의 주제를 새로운 대안이라고 잡은 것은 바로 현재의 정신건강 시스템을 바꾸어서 개인의 문제가 아니라 사회의 문제로 다시 재정립하는 시간을 갖자라고 하는 것이라고 생각이 듭니다. 우리는 이제까지 약물을 잘 복용해서 치료가 되어야 일상생활을 회복할 수 있다고 생각을 하고 그런 믿음을 전파해 왔습니다. 그것이 아니라 일단 개인의 생활과 사회적 생활을 회복을 하는 것이 가장 우선적이다. 공부를 하고 일을 하고 사회생활을 하고 결혼을 해야 되는 것이고 그리고 그래서 그런 경험이 있는 사람들이 사회 문제를 개혁하는 데 같이 힘을 합쳐야 되는 것입니다. 그런 과정을 통해서 비로소 당사자들이 회복이 되는 것이고 더 나아가서 우리 사회가 회복이 되는 것이 아닌가라는 생각이 듭니다. 이런 생각들을 우리나라에 있는 많은 당사자들이 같이 논의하고 고민하고 토론하고 있지만 선진국에서는 훨씬 이전부터 이러한 논의들을 진행해 왔습니다. 그래서 오늘 우리는 미국에 있는 당사자 운동의 리더 그리고 호주에서 당사자 운동을 하고 있는 분 그리고 영국에서 당사자 운동의 이런 추진력을 전문가로서 뒷받침해주고 도와주는 세 분을 모시고 저희가 강연을 듣고 또 질의응답을 하도록 하겠습니다. 먼저 미국에서 당사자 운동을 오랫동안 이끌어 오셨던 다니엘피셔 박사님의 강연을 듣도록 하겠습니다. 다니엘피셔 박사님의 경우에는 본인이 조현병으로 정신병원에 여러 차례 강제 입원을 당했던 경험이 있습니다. 그리고 정신병원에서의 강제 입원 당한 경험 때문에 정신과 의사가 되어야 되겠다라고 하는 결심을 하고 정신과 의사가 된 분입니다. 그리고 이제 정신과 의사로서 활동을 하면서 동료운동 그리고 당사자 운동을 이끌어 오시는 분입니다. 다니엘 피셔 박사님의 강연을 듣도록 하겠습니다.
Hi, my name is Daniel Fisher, and I'm coming to you from the United States. Very happy and honored to be able to address my peers in Korea, and I will share with you my experience over the last 45 years of helping to start and nurture the peer movement here in the United States. I'll begin with the values of our movement. And these are very, very important to have a set of values. The first is nothing about us without us. We want to be involved in all the important decisions involving our life. Secondly, we want to be treated as equally human and have equal human rights. Third, we advocate for empowering relationships that enable us to experience self-determination. Fourth, we want holistic health alternatives to the predominant medical approach. Fifth, we see mental health conditions as primarily understandable responses to trauma. Six, peer support we feel is essential to recovery. And seven, hope also is essential to recovery. I'll now go over the history of our peer movement. Just a brief history, and then I'll talk about my own involvement. In the 1960s, a cry went out across the US and Europe for human rights and civil rights to be upheld for women, for blacks, for indigenous people, for gay and lesbians, and for people with disabilities. These movements paved the way for our peer movement. In the early 70s, we called ourselves ex-patients, and the groups that we organized reflected our purpose, our need for freedom, our need for equality. For instance, the very first movement that we know of was in Portland, Oregon. It was called the Liberation Front of Portland, Oregon, Insane Liberation Front. The second was the Network Against Psychiatric Assault in San Francisco, 1971, and around the same time was the Mental Patient Liberation Front in Boston. My personal journey of liberation contributed to and paralleled a lot of the development of these movements. But first, let's go back to when I was 10 years old, and I was sexually abused by a teacher, which that trauma played a very big effect and had a scar on my psyche. Also, 2 years later, my younger sister stopped eating, developed severe anorexia, and that motivated me. I felt like I had to help her, and the ideas at the time were that these problems were due to a chemical imbalance. We know now that she also suffered from sexual abuse, but we didn't know that then. So I, like a good son, went out and I got a PhD in biochemistry. I became a neurochemist, weighing, measuring, trying to understand the chemical basis, so-called chemical basis of unhappiness. And I really believed at that time that humans were like machines, and if we were unhappy, we just needed a mechanic of the brain to sort of alter our chemistry. I was not very good at intimate relationships or being in love because my feelings were quite numb. And in fact, I got married, but one night I sat up in bed and I said, I just want the facts, the hard, cold facts. Not surprisingly, not so long after that, my wife left, and I was heartbroken and bereft, but just didn't understand why she could have left. I was just unconscious to life itself. So I dove into therapy, I dove into dance, I dove into meditation, I dove into psychedelics, and through all these experiences, I started to open the doors of perception, but I was blinded too much light, too much insight all at once. And I was terrified, absolutely terrified. And in my terror and my disillusionment with my work, which I didn't think would ever discover through chemistry, all these feelings and thoughts. And so I retreated into monologue, into my own version of reality. And slide 1 shows two people on the right engaged in heart-to-heart dialogue, in red, and verbal dialogue, and they're interacting. This is a fairly healthy way of being, but trauma separates us from each other, separates us from ourselves, and our thoughts are separated from our feelings. That's what happened to me when I retreated into my monologue, and I really wasn't able to connect with the reality of the people around me. Emotional CPR is well suited for restoring this heart-to-heart communication, but I didn't know about it at the time. I was 26. So the form of my monologue was my refusing to speak, my refusing to eat, my refusing to move. I was hospitalized on 3 occasions, and during each hospitalization, I learned that I was best assisted by peers, other patients on the unit, and by less formally trained people. Sometimes it was an attendant, sometimes it was a secretary. It chokes me up to think about it. Oh, when I was trapped in my silence, I was just looking for signs of human existence. Was there a person out there? And I remember saying to myself, if only these workers had been where I am right now, they'd know how to reach me, which actually meant just being with me. One day, while I was in seclusion, because I was apparently too happy, I was especially frightened, and I said to myself, if I ever get out of this, I'm going to become a psychiatrist, and I'm going to free everyone from these psychiatric hospitals. I told this to my therapist, George, and he was just marvelous. He said, I'll be at your graduation. And 6 years later, he came to my medical school graduation. He was somebody that always believed in me until I could believe in myself. And it's a very important part of recovery, is to find people who they believe in you. They believe in the you inside that you don't realize is there. He's no longer with us physically, but he also is spiritually here. But I felt that being a psychiatrist was not enough, and I yearned to meet kindred souls, like-minded people who shared my values. I found them in a radical newspaper, the Madness Network News, and in it I discovered that in Boston, where I was going for my psychiatric residency to a Harvard teaching hospital, that there was the Mental Patient Liberation Front. And that was the group I felt that would really make a big difference. I wasn't so impressed by the Harvard name as I was by Mental Patient Liberation Front. But I wrote them, but then they said, well, you can come as an ex-patient, but you can't come as a psychiatrist. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't divide myself in half, although I had a dream around that time that I was sort of divided in half. I was asked in the dream by some fishermen to come join them in their fishing, to help them fish. And I said, well, although my name is Fisher, I'm not such a great fisherman. And they said, we want you anyway. I said, why? And they said, look at yourself. And I looked down at myself, and I was half human and half fish. I was like a merman. And I think what it symbolized is that half of me has felt like a person lived experience, and half of me has felt like a psychiatrist. Sort of a no man's land, trapped in a no man's land between two conflicting views of reality. My career as a mental health advocate began the day I met Judy Chamberlain. And it was 1977, and it was the year that she published her groundbreaking book, On Our Own, which we still publish through the National Empowerment Center. And the subtitle for the book is Patient-Controlled Alternatives to the Mental Health System. Oh my gosh, she nailed it 43 years ago. She understood that long ago that basically we have to create alternatives to the traditional system. I don't know whether in the future there'll actually be a future for the traditional system, but I do know this. In order to recover, you need other people, you need friends, you need heart-to-heart communication. Well, though Judy died in 2011, her spirit of liberation lives on in my heart and the hearts of many others. In the 1980s, I started to speak publicly about my experience of recovery from schizophrenia. My first public address was on television, actually, a show called People Are Talking. And Judy had gotten me the spot to debate forced treatment. I actually debated my former supervisor in my residency, and as we were walking up to the stage, I told him, I revealed for the first time that I'd been hospitalized prior to my residency, and he said, "Oh, it's very fashionable to have been hospitalized psychiatrically." Made me so angry. Then I really felt that we needed to do was to start a center, sort of like the Stone Center for Women. And the idea really was formed by Pat Deegan, Judy Chamberlain, and myself in 1991. And Bill Anthony, we were consulting with the Center for Psych Rehab, and Bill Anthony was the director, and he said, "I think you three could start a very interesting center." So in 1991, we started the National Empowerment Center. We got a federal grant, and we've been supported ever since. And our center is really a voice for people lived experience nationally and internationally, so that people can know there is an alternative way of looking at these difficulties, an alternative to the mainstream narrative that these are strictly medical problems. So we speak, we write, we teach, we advocate that we who are labeled are fully human as any other human, and that we should be given the same rights as all members of society, and we use our wisdom through recovery of our life to transform the mental health system. Through my position as CEO of the National Empowerment Center, I've promoted recovery, both locally and nationally, and I was able to be appointed as a member of the White House Commission on Mental Health in 2002, 2003, and in that position, I was able to influence the commission to put recovery at the center of their report. And so the mission statement for that report is that we envisage a future when everyone with a mental illness will recover. Sadly, our federal government only made weak efforts in that direction. So, as usual, it was up to we, the people, and we organized a National Coalition for Mental Health Recovery, which is our national voice, and I'm president of that organization. And it's independent of the federal funding. We're able to advocate in behalf of thousands, millions of people labeled with psychiatric problems that have no voice. Another important function of our peer movement has been our annual National Alternatives Conference. And the federal government funded that for the first 32 years, from 1985 to 2017. And this has been, the Alternatives Conference has been very important for bringing leaders together from all over the world, not only to get to know each other, but also learn different types of self-help strategies. In fact, Dr. Ron Manderscheid has said that in the last 20 years, every major advance in the mental health system has been advocated and elaborated on by people with lived experience. Yet, because of our success, I believe, our funding was ended, our federal funding for alternatives was ended. But luckily, we've had this National Coalition of Mental Health Recovery in 2018, 2019. We were able to have alternatives. And in 2021, we expect to have an online version of alternatives. We invite any of you possibly to be participants in that conference. I'll now describe the development and teaching of emotional CPR. In 2005, I led a team of 6 peers to Louisiana right after a large hurricane had devastated Louisiana. And we trained 55 peers there in crisis approaches. But we didn't have a program really yet. It was just we pieced together something very quickly. And then in 2008, based on our experience in Louisiana and based on our own lived experience, a group of 20 of us began the development of emotional CPR, which we've been developing ever since. It's still a work in progress. We call it emotional CPR in parallel to CPR, which is cardiopulmonary resuscitation, a procedure by which you push on someone's chest, and when their physical heart stops, and you restart their heart. Well, emotionally, people's heart, their emotional heart, which is actually all over your body, needs restoration after trauma, especially. And so our goal is to teach emotional CPR for restarting people's emotional heart after trauma for everyone in the community. And during this era of this pandemic of COVID, and we don't know how long it's going to last, there's a lot of psychological distress. Who can you be with? Can you be in a group? And I know you all have managed quite well in South Korea, but I'm sure there still is, a lot of fear it might come back. So emotional CPR, in it, the C is for connecting, heart-to-heart connecting. And we call this, this is done through ting listening. We connect through ting listening. That's just named after the Chinese character for listen, ting, which is shown in slide 2. And that shows you that listen in Chinese is listen with your ears, your eyes, and your heart. So you see somebody, you hear somebody, and you feel somebody when you're with them. P is for empower. And although you can't empower someone else, you can enter into a relationship such that you can encourage their power to be expressed. And that's the power to heal. The power of self-expression, which is the power to heal. And as you're connecting and as you're encouraging and the empowerment of the person themselves, they start to revitalize. And that's R, revitalize. Which really means bringing life back. We have had people say that their life was actually saved by emotional CPR, that they didn't feel like living until they learned emotional CPR. I know for myself, it's made my life much fuller. And when I do emotional CPR, I feel more alive. I feel no task is too great. I feel empowered to give you this talk. It gives me confidence. I feel as though maybe I have something important to say. And if you look at the next slide, it shows the first intentions. We call them, they're not rules, it's not a cookbook. But if you keep in mind certain thoughts and feelings and you enter into a relationship with someone in distress or just someone day to day, it's very helpful. And the first intention is similar to what we went over in terms of connecting. That is, we connect through feelings first, not through words first, but feelings first. So we don't ask a lot of questions, and we try to minimize the talking part of it verbally so that we can feel the presence of the other person, and they can start to feel their own presence. And secondly, as I start to feel what it's like to be with you, maybe you're sad, I feel some sadness, I breathe into it, allow myself to feel it. I don't react right away, but I respond with my own take on it and share some of my feeling. And then I just try to be with you, not to fix, not to judge, not to advise. And I don't enter with, I know what's best for you. No, I enter humbly. You know what's best for you. I will be with you while we together try to uncover and explore what you're feeling and what might you do next. Together, then, we will release the power to heal, because it's in us both. Then the last is, authentically, we create new life and new voice and feel revitalized in the present moment, right this moment. So people have asked me what was most important in my recovery. And I'd say that these intentions of emotional CPR are the distillation of my own and actually probably hundreds of peers' experience as to what we have found most important in our recovery of a life. I literally experienced in my distress the world standing still. It seemed that time was divided into blocks of ice. I felt that I was suspended in a viscous substance that held me in suspended animation. Death seemed all around me. I remember one day I went out to eat, and I was in grave distress. And I went out to eat with a friend of mine, and he took us to breakfast at a nearby restaurant that was called the Empire. I thought it said the Vampire. Ooh, I was terrified. I really thought everyone was dead. The leaves had fallen from the trees. It was fall. Death seemed all around me. In contrast, emotional CPR has enabled me to experience the flow of life. It's taught me how to love and how to accept love. And this is the best way to overcome the terror and the fear of dying, is through love. This is illustrated in slide 5. I feel more truly alive, and in this slide you see fear and terror being reversed by love and hope and the unfolding of a flower, which is what I feel and I experience. I start noticing colors I hadn't noticed. The world seems like a kaleidoscope of beautiful glass colors. Sounds seem to be reminding me of music and of songs. A friend said that during my talk on eCPR, she felt as though she had gained extra heartbeats that filled the gaps that she had felt lost in before. She said this was like extra heartbeats. Emotional CPR supplied extra heartbeats. Well, when I wrote a book recently about my own experiences, I incorporated that into the title, Heartbeats of Hope. And it's partly the story of my own recovery and also my recommendations for other people's recovery. And now I'm much more interested in the emotional dimension of relating than in the words and the concepts, because words and concepts tend to separate me from myself and interrupt the flow of my feelings. My authenticity and spontaneity shine forth like a beacon of hope. Another important practice is recovery dialogues, and we're using this to try to transform the culture of the mental health system from individual pathology focus to interpersonal capacity. In slide 6, we see an illustration of 6 principles of dialogue that we use to guide the group when we do a training in emotional CPR. We usually have about 20 people in the 15 to 20 people. And also when we do recovery dialogues, we have about 15 people. So we convene this group, and first thing we do is go over 6 principles of dialogue, which bear some resemblance to the intentions, except they're focused on the group as a whole. We try to be non-judgmental. We use our authentic voice. We listen deeply, and we allow ourselves to listen to other people's beliefs without pushing them aside. We connect heart to heart, and we leave our hat at the door, our rank at the door. We have 2 facilitators. One is a peer and one is a clinician. And at the beginning, we have somebody read out the principles of dialogue. We pick a topic on recovery, and then we just share our perspectives in a respectful manner. And in the hearing and listening to different points of view, we can start to, all of us, think a little broader, think a little differently, think a little more comprehensively about what helps and what hurts. So in doing so, these recovery dialogues shift the culture of an organization to be more open to learning emotional CPR and learning open dialogue. What's open dialogue? Open dialogue is a new form of therapy practice that was developed in Tornio, Finland, just above the Arctic Circle. Over 30 years, I guess people there's a lot of darkness. In the winter, they have a long time to think. And this approach has been the most successful way of helping young people who are experiencing first break psychosis, help them back into day-to-day life, back into dialogue. And I participate in a 2-year training, and I use it in my practice with families. And the basic goal of open dialogue is to create an atmosphere within the family where every voice counts. And no one's to blame. Everyone can contribute to the recovery of a life of everyone in the family. It doesn't matter if it's the person who's labeled, the person that's not labeled. It's understood that everyone together is working on everyone's recovery. So in this, there's, what do people do who are the facilitators? Well, they talk with the family and then sometimes reflect with each other. And the 2 facilitators might have different points of view, which is helpful because that allows, it gives a model for it's okay to have different points of view within the family as well. And this helps with intergenerational conflict between parents and children or between husband and wife. And I integrate emotional CPR into my sessions. I give them homework. I say, here, take this workbook home, study it, learn the intentions. We have them right in the back of the book. Here are your 7 intentions. And sometimes one family put them up on the refrigerator, and any one family member could say, hey, you're not following the precepts of emotional CPR. And that way it sort of gives an equality to the family. Everyone is equally aware of what the goals are, and it gives them something to do in between the sessions. So through open dialogue, they can learn new ways of responding to each other in the here and now with love and compassion. It's also very valuable to have peers involved in the open dialogue, because peers can bring another point of view. What's the present state of our movement in the U.S.? Well, we've been developing a strong peer workforce over the last 20 years, and some of that development was spurred by the New Freedom Commission report. There was a goal within the report, Goal 2.2, which I worked on very hard, which says that the mental health system should involve consumers and families fully in orienting the mental health system towards recovery. The report goes on to state that by involving consumers and family members in planning, evaluation, and services, this is a way that they can play a big role. And this is really an embodiment of nothing about us without us. We want to be in the planning, we want to be in the evaluation, we want to be in services. We also want to be in training. A little more difficulty getting that into the wording. Another incentive to train peers has been the creation of the position of peer specialists, a certification process so that peers can get paid and reimbursed for their services. Still not at a decent rate, but paid. So peers now have quite a few active roles in crisis, in hospitals, and transition out of hospitals, and I'll name some of the other ways that peers are involved. There are challenges, though, because when peers are involved in a system that is still working by the old culture, the medical culture, peers are not utilized well. Sometimes peers are asked to make sure people take their medication, or sometimes peers are asked to help coerce somebody into the hospital. This should not be the function of peers. Peers are in a mutual power relationship, and these are skewing that relationship. In contrast to peers working for professionals is the role and the activity of peers in peer-run organizations. And in peer-run organizations, it's possible for peers to still operate by those major principles of our recovery movement. Peer-run respites is an excellent example of this. They are basically alternatives to hospitals for many people. And I've been very active in trying to generate more of them. We have 30 in this country, and that's really not enough. There are only three to four beds in every peer-run respite. So we're only talking 90 to 100 beds for people. It is a step, though, and considering only, I believe, Holland and Australia have one or two each, we have created the majority of the peer-run respites in the world. I'll take a deep breath on this one, though. I'm so upset and angry that psychiatric hospitals continue to dominate the scene. And I worked hard in Massachusetts, took 2 years, and through a team, we called ourselves the Groundhogs, coming from the ground up. We were able to achieve one peer-run respite after 2 years of advocacy for 3 beds. Yes, it is infuriating. They only cost 30% as much. They're not nearly as traumatic. You have continuity of care. There's so many reasons that they're better than psychiatric hospitals. So why do you think psych hospitals still remain the major way that people are treated in intense situations? Well, if I were with you in person, I'd wait to hear. I think one of the major reasons is that the main function of a psychiatric hospital is not healing, is not wellness, it's not personal growth, it's social control. If you've misbehaved, and it's not too terrible in misbehaving, maybe you took off your clothes, maybe you shouted too loud, you won't get sent to prison maybe, but you'll get sent to a psychiatric hospital, which feels like a mental prison. A lot of people who are sent to prison some of them would rather be there than be in a psychiatric hospital. One participant in ECPR, he was a former gang member and tough guy, had been in jail for quite a while, in prison. He said, I'd rather be in prison than a psychiatric hospital. In a prison, they capture your body. In a psychiatric hospital, they capture your mind. We really, really need alternatives to psych hospitals. By the way, the hospital, the peer-run rest was developed in Western Mass is called a FIA house. And you can find that through the website, westernmassrlc.org. Another important development by peers is called warm lines, peer-run warm lines. A warm line is for persons in distress to call when they don't want to call a hotline, crisis line. Why are people reluctant to call crisis lines? Well, crisis workers don't have very much time to work with you. Most of them don't have lived experience. It's difficult for them to connect with somebody who's in another reality or who's not sure where they want to live. So they tend to call the police if they feel there's a risk involved. And they don't really have time or opportunity to adequately evaluate or bring people down. Whereas a warm line is staffed by people with lived experience who are given more time to spend with the caller, and as a result are able to often bring somebody down who otherwise wouldn't be brought down. Callers are more likely to be honest about how desperate they feel with a warm line staff, and they can form a deeper connection with the warm line staff. And the warm line staff can often give hope because they've been through a similar experience in a way that's harder for crisis line staff. Another important example of a peer-run organization are drop-in centers and peer-run recovery learning communities. These settings, unlike most clinical settings, peers are more likely to make friends. I helped start one here in Massachusetts. It was called Ruby Rogers Center. It was a drop-in center. It's no longer funded because it refused to become so programmatic, which honestly I think takes away a lot of the spirit of these social clubs. So this father came to me and he said, my son has been in inpatient hospitalization, outpatient, he's been to day treatment, all kinds of different settings. And he said he never made a friend. But coming to Ruby Rogers for the first time, he started to make some friends. And that's made such a big difference in his life. He really feels that life is more worth living. Also here in Massachusetts, we did an advocacy effort several years ago. And a group of us carried coffins, not real coffins, but they looked like coffins, to our Department of Mental Health to dramatize the finding that on an average, people labeled with mental illness die 25 years earlier than the general population. And a lot of this is due to inadequate care in the community level. Inadequate housing, inadequate food, inadequate social relations. So we proposed there be more of these social clubs, and the department funded 5 recovery learning communities, not centers, not just a physical center everybody has to come to, but a network of satellite organizations that could support people where they are. Help them make friends, get a job, find a place to live. I'd like to make some recommendations for transforming the Korean mental health system and to create a new way of assisting persons with mental health conditions. We need to listen to the emerging wisdom of those of us with lived experience? Well, we have to educate the public that our point of view is important, and we need to find ways that media will carry our stories of recovery. And I think the more times that people can tell their stories of recovery, the more it will destroy the prejudice and discrimination and the hopelessness that locks people away from their own recovery. In the addictions world, it's well understood that people who are in recovery from addictions or have recovered are the leaders of that field. AA was developed by two addicts, and many addiction counselors today and administrators are people with addiction history. Much more difficult in mental health. I think there's this fear of the inmates running the asylum. Well, actually, in the independent living movement, it is the blind leading the blind is actually the way it works. And people who can't hear or have hearing loss, they're the best for helping other people who have hearing loss, because these are people that have found adaptations and adjustments and learn how to live in the community. So we are experts by experience, and we want society to recognize us as that. We also need to change the paradigm. This hypothesis that mental health conditions are due to a chemical imbalance actually increases prejudice and discrimination. Parents say they don't want their son or daughter marrying somebody that has a chemical imbalance. They don't know when it's going to go off. If, on the other hand, it's viewed as an interpersonal difficulty or the result of trauma that you can heal from, there's more hope. In a final meeting with my therapist, George, he alerted me to a theory of life called the San Diego theory. And according to this theory, knowing is the activity involved in self-creation, self-making, and self-producing. In other words, knowing or consciousness is the very process of life. For every life form, you don't need a nervous system for, in other words, consciousness. According to this theory, mind and matter are no longer seen as separate categories, but a process and structure together. This theory helps me understand the mistake of defining mental health conditions as chemical imbalance. This is why we can never solve a complex problem like our mental health and our behavior just with a medication. Medications have a place, but it's you, the person, ultimately, who has to self-create, self-author. So the Santiago theory's emphasis on self-creation echoes a central value of our movement, and that is self-determination. This theory helps me understand why it is so important for us to be self-determining. Why? Because we can create new life for ourselves from within, and that's how we recover our life. Recovery of our life cannot be done to someone or for someone. It has to occur from our gaining control of our life. I had a dream 20 years ago that showed how we people with lived experience have the wisdom to help those who are not yet labeled. We were in a group, 8 of us, talking, sharing, understanding, supporting each other, caring about each other, fairly calm about it. All around us, the chronically normal, the people not yet labeled, were helter-skelter, and they would stop and say, "What are you doing? We want what you have." And they would sorry for the interruption. They would look at us and interview us and say, "What drugs are you on? What program are you on?" And we just said we're sharing. And it was our early indication of what emotional CPR was going to be. It's before I actually developed emotional CPR. And in this age of the COVID-19 pandemic, there are a lot of people helter-skelter who haven't been labeled. So those of us that have been labeled, we can hold a lot of hope out for those people that are, you know, understandably worried about the virus, but we've seen much worse and we've recovered. So we can give you hope. There is hope of getting through this. Just stay in touch with yourself and your feelings. Stay in touch with other people and create. We peers want society to appreciate that our lived experience of recovery has given us deep wisdom. In order to bring programs, though, like these peer-run respites and emotional CPR to Korea, you will need to develop strong and fearless advocates. To meet this need, in the U.S., Judy Chamberlain and I developed a training program called Finding Our Voice. This training is offered online, helps peers to experience their own power. Since mental health issues are usually due to a deficit in power, gaining power in one's life is the most important factor in the full recovery of a full life. Finding Your Voice training is based on 12 P's of empowerment, and you can see those in the slide 7. To become an advocate, you will need to connect with other peers. You can't develop your power alone. You need it with other people. Through these meetings together, you experience consciousness raising, and you'll understand all the ways that you've been oppressed by power imbalances. This awareness leads you to anger at the way that you've been treated, and through the expression of this anger in the group, you're able to transform the anger to passion, and that passion becomes the source of your advocacy. With that passion, you can speak. With that passion, you can plan. With that passion, you can persuade. And this is the way that advocates are changing the force and the face of mental health. My anger still fuels my passion. I still remember being locked up in seclusion and forcibly medicated, and I'm still angry about it. But I don't walk into a meeting and immediately tell them how angry I am. I tell them I want change now. I want alternatives to hospitals now. So together, we're advocating for a number of changes. We continue to advocate, and I think it's important to realize that those in power don't share their power without a struggle. So be prepared for resistance. I recall Gandhi's observation about his political struggle in freeing 600 million Indians from English rule. He said, first they ignore you, and they laugh at you, and they fight with you, and then you win.
피셔 박사님에게 질문을 하고, 그리고 또 필요하면은 또 토론을 이어가고, 또 지금 온라인으로 계속 질문해 주시는 분들이 있는데요. 그분들에 대해서 그러니까 다른 질문이 있으면은 정리해서 또 말씀을 드리도록 하겠습니다. Hi, Daniel. Hi, do you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello? Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Hi.
질문 시작하기 전에 저희가 스피커하고 조금만 확인하고
네.
하겠습니다.
Hi, Daniel.
Hello.
Do you hear me?
Yes, hello. I can hear you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello.
시간이 좀 걸리나 보죠.
Let me try a different speaker.
Hi.
Hi.
Nice to meet you.
Hi.
Thank you very much for
Yes.
your participation in the conference and so wonderful and so very helpful presentation. We invited 3 panelists. I introduce you to them. First, the Miss Jung-ha Lee and Miss Sundar Kim. They are Korean peer movement leaders, and we invite also one PhD, Mr. Song. They would like to ask some question to you. And then, so we invite another person, PhD candidate Yoo Jung-kim. She helps panelists to connect with you by translation. And then,
Okay.
first of all, so I invite Ms. Jung-ha Lee to ask some question and comment on your presentation.
Glad to.
이상한
Can you
대표님
hear me?
시작하시면 될 것 같아요.
죄송한데 여성분이 혹시 말씀하는 저희 쪽으로 잘 나오는지 한 번만 더 확인 가능할까요?
안 들리는 것 같은데.
Do you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
예.
혹시
Can you hear me?
아, 저분이
저거는 저희 화면이랑
그 음소 풀어달라고 한번 얘기해 주세요. 이분이 스스로 했어요. 집에서.
Your mic is off.
Oh, really? You can't hear me?
Turn on the mic. This.
아, 그래요?
I think it's working at my end.
There seems some technical problem. Sorry.
I'll try not to use these
Okay.
earphones. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Ah, good. Okay.
이재원 대표님 먼저 보면.
And then, yeah, so Jung-ha Lee will ask you some questions.
Hello.
안녕하세요, 박사님. 두 번째 뵙습니다. 작년에 뵙고, 네, 이렇게 화면으로 뵙게 돼서 너무너무 반갑습니다.
이거 마이크 해주세요. 영어로.
Hello.
Hello. I think I need translation.
그냥 쭉 얘기하시면 될 것 같습니다.
이제 시간을 절약하기 위해서 질문 드리고 싶은 내용이 있는데요. 사실 저희 한국에서는 당사자 운동의 역사가 그렇게 길지 않은데 미국은 저희 한국보다 굉장히 긴 역사를 가지고 있는 것으로 배웠고 또한 이야기를 들었는데요. 저희 한국에서 당사자 운동이나 모임 또는 혹시 우리 조직화 과정에서 굉장히 어려움이 많습니다. 그중에 어려움이 물론 당사자 집단과 사회와의 관계도 있겠지만 당사자 집단 내부에서 일어나는 여러 가지 불협화음, 갈등, 또 그 안에서 불안정한 관계 속에서 발생되는 문제로 또한 굉장히 힘들 때가 많이 있거든요. 그런 위기가 왔을 때 조직이나 그 단체죠. 단위에서 위기가 왔을 때는 어떻게 극복하셨는지 그런 사례들을 한번 디테일하게 말씀해 주시면 감사하겠습니다.
She said, Hello, Dr. Fisher. Nice to meet you. Her question was, in peer-led meetings or peer-centered organizations, how did you overcome emotional crisis, such as like conflicts and insecurities among the peers at organization level? Also, what do you think is the core value of peer movement?
Okay. I'm very pleased, by the way, to be here and speak with you all in person. And if you like, I'll just say two sentences and then you could translate.
Yes, okay.
Okay.
First question: how do we deal with a stress or insecurity? We support one another. We provide peer support to each other. We listen, we feel, we understand each other, and we provide emotional support. That's a very important part of our self-help.
Did you have it in like specific cases or?
제가 I will translate. 지금 피셔 박사님 말씀하신 것이 지금 당사자들 집단 내에서 갈등이 있고 이럴 때 서로 지원하고 그리고 지지하는 것, 그리고 이제 특히 서로의 말을 이렇게 잘 경청하는 것, 이런 것들이 굉장히 중요하답니다. 정서적으로 지원하는 것, 그러니까 정서적으로 서로를 이렇게 지지하는 것들, 그러니까 이것이 바로 자조다. 우리가 흔히 자조 모임을 많이 이야기하는데요. 그것이 굉장히 중요하다라고 말씀하셨어요. 고은.
Okay. The second part, what is the value of peer support? First of all, peer support gives hope. There's because a peer is a living example that somebody can recover from a mental health condition. Visible proof that these are not lifelong conditions. You can translate.
지금 말씀하신 거는 이제 그러니까 당사자 운동에서의 핵심적인 가치가 어떤 거냐라고 하는 질문인데요. 희망이라고 하는 것이 이제 가장 중요한 부분이다라고 하는 것입니다. 당사자 자체가 이제 희망을 주는 살아있는 그런 예라라고 하는 말씀을 하시고요. 당사자 자신이 그러니까 이 회복에서 다른 사람들을 지원하는 것 자체가 눈에 보이는 그리고 눈에 보이지 않는 그런 산 정인이 되기 때문에 그게 굉장히 그러니까 그런 의미에서 희망이라는 게 중요한 가치다라는 말씀을 해주셨어요. 네, go on, please.
Second, a peer support provides friendship. So you don't feel that you're alone. You don't feel that the pain of loneliness, which is a source of great discomfort, being alone.
그리고 우정이라고 하는 것도 굉장히 중요한 부분이라고 합니다. 그러니까 당사자들이 우리 다른 지역사회에 있는 동료들이 외로움, 그리고 이런 것들을 굉장히 홀로 있다라고 하는, 그리고 고통스러운 이런 것들을 많이 느끼는데, 이런 것이 사실 우리 마음을 굉장히 불편하게 하는 것인데, 동료 지원을 하는 것 자체가 이런 이제 우정을 느낄 수 있는 이런 어떤 부정적인 감정을 없애는 중요한 요소가 된다고 말씀하셨어요. Please.
Third, you gain strength by being around other peers. You gain a stronger voice so that you can influence the decision makers around you to create new policies that are alternative policies to the existing professional-led organizations.
힘을 이렇게 모으는 것, 이런 것도 굉장히 중요한 부분이라고 이야기합니다. 그래서 우리가 정책이라든지 또 주변의 의사결정을 하는 사람들에게 동료들이 힘을 모아서 영향력을 행사하는 것, 이렇게 해서 또 기존에 있는 시스템에 대해서 새로운 대안을 제시하는 것, 이런 것들이 또 중요한 요소라고 말씀하셨어요. Please go on.
Fourth, peers provide knowledge of alternative ways of gaining stability and gaining calmness through learning about exercise, learning about holistic health, learning about new programs that for financial support or for housing.
그리고 또 하나는 이 동료 운동이랑, 그러니까 동료 지원이라고 하는 것이 지혜를 이렇게 다른 사람에게 제공해 줄 수 있는 거라고 말씀을 하시네요. 특히 이제 그러니까 우리가 불안하고 이럴 때, 그러니까 안정감을 이렇게 되찾을 수 있는 것, 그리고 이제 그러니까 진정되는 것, calmness라고 하는 게 좀 그러니까 마음의 평화가 이렇게 오는 것, 이런 것들을 이제 회복할 수 있는 그런 지혜들을 동료 운동을 통해서, 동료 지원을 통해서 얻을 수 있다라고 말씀하셨습니다.
Other question?
기수도 기자님.
And then I will invite 순덕 김.
예. 안녕하십니까? 예, 저는 이제 수원에서 그러니까 한국이 정신장애인들이 그 실태를 보면은 약 27가지 조항에 걸쳐서 직업 선택의 자유를 제한당하고 있습니다. 실제로 다른 여러 기타 유형의 장애들보다 실제로 정신질환을 앓고 있는 당사자 동료들의 삶의 질은 굉장히 열악한다. 지금 여러 장애 유형 중에서 가장 꼴찌로 나타나고 있어요. 직업 선택에 있어서도 제한을 받고 있는데 약 한 27개 조항에서 제한을 받고 있는데요. 심지어 어떤 6개 정도의 조항에서는 철저하게 아예 제한을 법률적으로 근거를 만들어서 제한을 해두고 있습니다. 근데 지금 현재 우리 수원 정신건강 복지센터 기초센터에서는 중앙에서 하는 중앙정신건강센터에서 하는 동료지원 활동가라는 프로그램을 만들어서 동료지원 활동 직군을 만들어서 이를 통해서 복지를 실현하려고 해요. 그런데 중요한 거는 이러한 당사자들이 정신질환 당사자들이 막상 그 일을 하려고 하면은 생존자로서 갖고 있는 정체성으로 들여다볼 때 사회 안에서는 직업을 제한을 해두고 있으면서 장애연금이나 핸디캡을 장애연금이나 수당으로 생활을 하도록, 아니면 기초생활수급자라든가 이렇게 해서 생활하도록 장치는 마련되어 있지만 실제 소득이 지체장애인이 127만 원을 받을 때 정신장애인들은 54만 원을 받는 걸로 나타나 있어요. 이걸 가지고 생활을 하니까 월 평균 수입이 가장 낮은 사람들입니다. 근데 이런 사람들이 직업을 갖다가 동료 지원 활동을 통해서 직군을 통해서 이제 양성이 되려고 하면은 이 사람들에게 가장 필요한, 미국과 한국의 차이점인지는 모르겠지만 가장 필요한 어떤 철학적 가치, 윤리적 가치가 어떤 것들이 있는지, 어떤 자세가 요구되는지 그것이 궁금합니다.
So in Korea, people with mental disorders are subject to legal restrictions in their career choices. There are about 27 restrictions on acquiring professional license or qualifications. Therefore, the quality of life of people with mental disorders is significantly lower than that of people with other disorders. In fact, they are known to have the lowest quality of life. Nowadays in Korea, some people with mental disorders have a job as peer specialist. I was curious about the philosophical and ethical value of having a job as a peer specialist in the United States.
Well, having a job as a peer specialist gives income. Secondly, it gives self-esteem. It elevates a person's value in their own eyes, in the eyes of people around them, and it gives meaning because to help another person is a way to feel that your existence matters in the world, that you're not just a number or a statistic, but you actually contribute to another person's well-being. Very, very important.
지금 말씀하신 거는 이제 동료지원가로서 활동하는 것은 첫째 소득을 벌어들이고 그리고 자존감을 회복할 수 있는 것이고 그리고 또 삶에서의 가치를 이렇게 그러니까 가지는 것이기 때문에 굉장히 중요하다고 말씀하셨고요. 그리고 이제 달리 이야기하면 의미 있는 삶 그리고 다른 사람을 도움으로써 뭔가 기여하는 삶을 살아갈 수 있다는 측면에서 상당히 중요하다 그 말씀하셨어요. Please go on.
In terms of legal restrictions, we have stigma. There is stigma and there is discrimination. But there is some protection. We have a law which protects people with disabilities. It's called the Americans with Disability Act, which says that if you're qualified for a job, you cannot be disqualified on the basis of your disability. And I was able to get a medical license despite having a psychiatric disability.
이런 이제 법적인 제한이 있는 것 자체는 그 자체가 스티그마고 그리고 장애인을 차별하는 것이라고 이야기를 합니다. 미국의 경우에는 이런 것 차별이나 스티그마로부터 보호해주는 미국 장애인법, ADA라고 하는 미국 장애인법이 있어서 법적으로 보호를 받는 거고 피츠 박사님은 정신질환이 있고 앞서도 말씀하셨던 것처럼 3번에 걸쳐서 강제 입원을 당하셨던 분인데요. 그럼에도 불구하고 의사 자격을 자기가 취득할 수가 있게 되었다라고 이야기했어요. Please go on.
That's all. That's all.
Okay.
도저히 생각할 수가 없는 일이 미국에서는
예.
한국에서는 주연경 당사자가 의사를 할 수가 없습니다. 사실 아니신가요?
It feels like it is almost impossible in Korea to make that happen.
Yeah. And then next question will be raised by Dr. Song.
예, 저는 심플하게 그냥 질문하겠습니다. 피셔 박사님이 마지막에 이제 동료 주도 위기 쉼터를 미국 전역에 구축하는 게 이제 자기의 마지막 목표이다라고 얘기하셨던 부분에서 굉장히 많은 감동을 받았고요. 그래서 이제 저도 굉장히 관심이 많이 있는데 사실 이제 한국에서는 아직까지 동료주도 위기 쉼터를 해본 적은 없습니다. 그래서 피셔 박사님께서 동료주도 위기 쉼터를 직접 시범으로 하시면서 실천적으로 경험적으로 가장 어려웠던 점 혹은 동료주도 위기 쉼터 운영에 있어서 가장 중요하다고 생각하는 것 얘기해 주시면 감사드리겠습니다.
So you briefly mentioned that your final goal is to run peer-run respite nationwide. It was very inspiring to hear. What were the difficulties with the peer-run respite during that while you were running it, and what do you think was the most important thing from that experience?
Okay, the biggest difficulty in starting peer-run respite is attitudes of discrimination and prejudice. There is a belief, a false belief, that people with psychiatric disabilities cannot run a organization like a respite. But we've proven that that's not true, because we've proven that people, we say, with lived experience now are running 30 of these respites.
가장 큰 어려움은 그러니까 지금 차별과 편견이, 그러니까 정신질환 있는 사람이 어떻게 그런 걸 운영하느냐라고 하는 그런 차별과 편견이 가장 큰 부분이 어려움이었다고 이야기를 합니다. 그렇지만 이제 이런 활동들을 통해서 그런 편견과 차별이 잘못되었다라고 하는 걸 증명했다고 그래요. 그래서 미국에서 현재 30개의 당사자가 직접 운영하는 쉼터가 있다고 이야기합니다. Please go on.
We had to obtain funding for the respites, and the funding was difficult at first to obtain because of the prejudice and discrimination. But they're much more economical than a psychiatric hospital. So this is an advantage to having such a respite. Also, people's testimonial and research that we've been doing shows that there's higher satisfaction with respites than with the psychiatric hospital, and we're getting articles published about these respites. So these are changing people's attitudes and influencing the decisions in a positive way.
제가 딴 이야기 하느라고 잘 못 들었는데 죄송합니다. 이 당사자가 운영하는 쉼터의 이제 기금을 이렇게 받아내는 것이 굉장히 쉬운 문제가 아닌데 그동안에 그걸 이제 겪어갔던 사람들의 정언 그리고 연구 과정을 통해서 이 쉼터가 당사자가 운영하는 쉼터가 훨씬 더 정신병원보다 훨씬 더 효과적이다. 라고 하는 것들을 증명을 했고 그것을 통해서 사람들이 당사자가 운영하는 쉼터에 대한 자세가 점점 이렇게 변화해 나가고 있다라고 하는 말씀을 하셨던 것 같습니다. 자, so hi Daniel, there are so many questions from the online audience, but we have time limitation.
Time.
So, yeah. So I would like to ask one more questions. by Ms. Kim.
Okay. 중복되는 질문이 많아서 한 질문만 해보도록 하겠습니다. So some questions were already answered. So I'll just pick one question from the floor. So when you meet peers, we tend to become adept in a relationship where peers keep seeking help and social workers keep providing help. How can we make this relationship between peer and social worker more meaningful?
Well, I think teaching emotional CPR to the social workers would be very helpful. The social workers need to understand that equality is very important. That they need to feel comfortable sharing more of their humanity, more of their feelings also, so that they don't always position themselves as the expert. Then there can be collaboration between the peers and the social workers.
지금 그 미국에서는 당사자만이 운영하는 그런 쉼터도 있고 당사자하고 사회복지사가 같이 이제 공동으로 운영하는 것도 있고 그런데요. 지금 피셔 박사님이 말씀하신 것은 이제 정서적인 심폐소생술 ECPR이라고 하는 이런 것들이 사회복지사들에게 굉장히 도움이 많이 될 것이다. 그리고 중요한 것은 사회복지사와 동료가 이렇게 이제 위계 질서가 있는 것이 아니라 평등한 관계에 있고 같은 인간으로서 협력을 하는 관계에 있다라고 하는 것들을 인식하는 것, 이것이 굉장히 중요한 가치다라고 말씀하셨습니다. Do you want other remarks or?
Just that I'm very excited that you're having this conference and the new alternatives for Korea. And I wish you the best of luck for many more. And I look forward to the time in the future when I can return to Korea in person and meet you in person.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I hope also we will meet in person in Korea.
Yeah.
See you. Bye-bye.